She couldn't see the world, but she could hear every lie it whispered. Abandoned, unwanted, and nearly sold to a man who reeked of danger. Her fate changed in 30 seconds when a silent stranger bought her freedom. Or so it seemed. But in a land where silence hides secrets, and the ground itself remembers blood, one question remains. Who saved whom?
The Wyoming wind tasted like dry grass and distance. I stood on the warped pine boards of the way station. My hands were folded together in front of my skirt. I kept my chin up facing the open prairie. It's a trick you learn early on. If you keep your spine straight and look dead ahead, people forget your eyes don't work. They assume you see what they see. I couldn't see the dust, but I listened to it hitting the wood. I listened to the men. There were about 8 of them gathered around the platform. I could tell by the shifting boots, the clinking of spurs, the heavy, restless breathing of men who had been riding too long. The Boston wagon train was gone. They had rolled out an hour ago, left in a hurry to beat the winter snow over the pass, left me sitting on a wooden bench. In the panic of packing, nobody remembered the blind mail-order bride. Or maybe they did remember, and they just didn't care. The frontier was hard. People threw away anything that slowed them down. Mr. Higgins, the labor broker, cleared his throat. He had the wet, wheezing voice of a man who sold cheap meat and told bad lies. "All right, boys, listen up," Higgins said. I heard him slap a piece of paper against his thigh. The wagon train moved out, left this one behind. The original buyer, a fellow from Denver, took one look at her condition and broke the contract on the spot. I didn't flinch. You learn not to flinch. Pity is a trap, and showing fear just invites the wolves. "Now," Higgins continued, stepping closer to me. "She's got a condition. Her eyes are no good. Stone blind." A low murmur ran through the crowd, an ugly, disappointed sound. "But," Higgins raised his voice, adopting the tone of a desperate salesman, "she doesn't complain. She speaks 4 languages, reads and writes. Good for a clerk, maybe, or whatever else you need keeping warm. $40 takes the contract. Cheap price for a quiet woman." $40. That was my worth today. The price of a decent saddle, the cost of a good mule. Footsteps approached the platform, heavy, dragging a little on the left heel. The smell hit me long before the man spoke. Stale whiskey, unwashed wool, sour, anxious sweat. "I'll take her," a gravelly voice grunted. He stopped right at the edge of the platform, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "Name's Holt. Got a mining claim up the ridge. Could use a woman to keep the fire going and the pot stirred. Don't need her to see to do that." My stomach turned to ice. My instincts screamed, "Do not let this man buy you." He smelled of violence. He smelled of dark, cold cabins and heavy hands. "40 it is, Holt," Higgins said, sounding massively relieved to be rid of his problem. Then another set of footsteps cut through the wind. These were different. Measured, quiet, but utterly deliberate. No wasted motion. Every step landed exactly where it was meant to. The smell of cheap whiskey was suddenly overwhelmed by something else. Cedar wood, leather, clean soil, and a profound, heavy quiet. The footsteps stopped right beside the broker's table. Paper rustled. A solid metallic clink sounded on the wood. Coins. "What's this?" Higgins asked. His tone shifted instantly. It lost all its swagger. $40, Higgins read, his voice wavering slightly. "Cash." "Hey!" Holt barked. The whiskey smell flared closer as the miner lunged forward. "I claimed her first, Dunn. Back off. She's mine." Silence. Not an empty silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. It dropped over the platform like a thick wool blanket. I heard Holt take a deep breath to shout again, but the breath hitched in his throat. He choked on his own words. I heard his heavy boots shuffle backward. 1 step, 2. I couldn't see the man named Dunn, but I could feel him. He was projecting a threat so cold, so absolute, that a drunken, angry miner didn't dare test it. "Right then," Higgins stammered, the paper crinkling fast as he folded it. "Contract transfers to Elias Dunn. Paid in full. She's all yours, mister." 30 seconds. That was all it took. I had just traded owners. A hand touched my elbow. I jumped slightly. It was just a touch, not a grab, not a pull. A firm, calloused guide. I took a steadying breath. I let him lead me to the wagon. The wagon seat was hard, unpolished wood. I sat as far to the edge as I could, keeping a wide space between us. I gripped the fabric of my skirt. I counted the jolts in the dirt road to estimate the distance we were traveling. 15 minutes passed. The horses trotted steadily. 30 minutes, just the wind in the prairie grass. Just the wooden wheels crushing loose gravel, not a single word. Usually, men talked. They bragged. They made demands. They listed their rules. They tried to scare you to establish dominance right out of the gate. This man just drove. An hour went by. The silence stretched thin. It started to feel less like quiet and more like a tactic. A game to see who would break first. A way to make me anxious before giving an order. I knew those games. I hated those games. I broke it first. "You haven't said a word," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. The wagon rolled on for another dozen yards. Then I felt a shift in the bench. He pulled back on the leather reins. The horses slowed, snorted, and came to a halt. The wind settled around us, vast and empty. I heard the scratch of something hard, wood scraping on wood. Then he pushed a flat, dusty object gently against my hands in my lap. I held it. I felt the wooden frame. I felt the flat slate surface. A chalkboard. A strange, suspended moment hung in the air. He was waiting for me to read it. I let out a slow, tired breath. I lowered the board. "I need you to read it to me," I said, looking straight ahead at the empty air. "I can't feel chalk dust on slate. I don't see anything, not your words, not your face, just light and shadows." The chalkboard was pulled away. The scratching stopped entirely. I heard him shift on the seat. I heard the leather harness creak as the horses stamped a hoof. He took a breath. It sounded like an old, rusted hinge being forced open after years in the damp dark. "I don't talk." 3 words. They sounded rough. They sounded like they cost him something terrible to push out of his throat. I turned my face toward the sound of his voice. "Ever?" Silence. Then he reached over. He tapped the back of my hand once with a heavy finger. A signal. "Is that a yes?" I asked. Another single tap. "Yes." "Then how are we going to do this?" I asked him. He took my right hand. His skin was rough like sandpaper, thick with old scars, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. He guided my index finger in the air. He pressed my fingertip onto the smooth slate of the chalkboard. With his own hand guiding mine, he traced letters. He pressed hard enough for me to feel the motion of the path. Nothing. I followed the movement, my mind translating the shapes into letters. IUANTNOTHINGFROMYOU. He paused, started a new line. ROOFFOODUNTILWINTERENDS. He let go of my hand. I sat back against the rigid wooden seat. The knot of tension at the base of my neck loosened, just a fraction. "All right," I said to the wind. "Then we will have to learn how to speak to each other." We arrived at the ranch when the air turned sharply cold. The sun was dropping behind the mountains. I could feel the temperature plummeting on my cheeks. The wind was different here, heavier, slower. It smelled like cured hay, manure, and thick pine. A creek ran somewhere to the left. I mapped it in my mind immediately. Elias guided me inside. He placed my hand lightly on his forearm, not holding my wrist, just offering a rail for me to hold. We walked 17 steps from the wagon to the porch, 2 steps up, over the threshold. The house smelled like dry wood smoke, old paper, and coffee. He led me down a short hall. He stopped. He placed my hand on a wooden door frame. Then he moved my hand down to the cold metal lock of a door. He pressed a key into my palm. It was heavy iron, cold against my skin. He stepped back. His boots sounded dull on the floorboards. He was leaving me to my room, giving me shelter, asking for absolutely nothing in return. It was an act of profound mercy. But mercy wasn't enough. Mercy still meant I was a thing to be pitied, a stray dog brought in from the rain out of the goodness of his heart. If I was going to survive here, if I was going to keep my sanity in this dark, silent house, I had to establish exactly who I was. I couldn't let the labor contract define me. I gripped the iron key tight. The edges bit into my skin. "Mr. Dunn," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the narrow hallway. His footsteps stopped. He turned around. I heard the floorboards groan under his weight. I turned to face where he stood. I looked straight ahead, focusing perfectly on the sound of his breathing. "I need to say something," I began. I made sure my voice held no tremble, no hesitation, only absolute, unbending certainty. "Mr. Dunn, I know what that paper in your pocket says. I know you paid $40 for me. You can buy my time. You can buy my labor, but you cannot buy my dignity." He didn't move. He just listened. "My blindness does not strip me of my autonomy," I continued, speaking clearly, laying the words out like stones building a fortress. "I may not be able to see the path in front of me, but I see my own worth perfectly well. When the wagon train left me, when that broker tried to sell me to a drunk, they treated me like defective goods, like property to be discarded. I took a deliberate step forward, toward him. I need you to understand this right now. In this house, I am a human being. I am a partner in my own survival. I am not a piece of property changing hands. True equality begins with acknowledging that I have rights, regardless of what my eyes can or cannot do. If you pity me, you diminish me." I stopped. I waited. The heavy silence stretched between us. It was a massive gamble. Men out here didn't like women who lectured them on rights. They liked obedience. They liked quiet. But Elias Dunn was a man who lived entirely in the quiet. He understood the weight of words better than anyone who spoke them freely. I heard him step closer. 1 step, 2. He stopped right in front of me. I could smell the leather and cedar on his coat. He reached out. He took my right hand. He turned my palm upward. With his rough, calloused index finger, he began to trace letters directly into my skin. He pressed hard, hard enough that the intent was unmistakable. It wasn't chalk dust, it was flesh on flesh. Notsold. He paused. He took a slow breath. He traced the next words deliberately, making sure I felt every single curve, every single line. HEREYOUBELONGTOYOURSELF. Here, you belong to yourself. I closed my hand into a fist, holding the ghost of his words tightly against my palm. He stepped back. He turned. He walked out the front door. The heavy wood closed behind him with a solid, echoing thud, leaving me alone in the hall. I stood in a strange house in a wild territory, with an iron key in one hand, and my absolute freedom traced into the other. I found the door handle. I stepped into my room. I did not lock the door. The first thing you learn about a house when you can't see it is how it breathes. I woke up in the dark. It was always dark, of course, but the morning dark has a different weight. The air is thinner, colder. I lay still under the heavy wool blanket. I listened. Wind rattled the glass in the window pane, a steady northern push. But beneath the wind, the house had its own pulse, wood contracting in the chill, a mouse scurrying somewhere in the walls. Then a floorboard groaned. It was a heavy sound, deliberate. 3 rooms away. I counted the rhythm. 1, 2, a pause. 3. Elias Dunn was awake. I sat up. The floor was freezing against my bare feet. I didn't reach for a candle. I didn't need one. I used my hands to find my boots. I laced them by memory. I stepped out into the hallway. I kept my right hand hovering an inch from the wall, tracing the draft of the air. I could hear the cast-iron stove in the kitchen, the scrape of metal on metal, the sudden sharp hiss of a match striking, the smell of sulfur, then the warm, dry scent of burning cedar. I walked toward the warmth. I stopped at the edge of the kitchen. I listened to him move. He was a big man, but he didn't waste his steps. He moved from the wood box to the stove, then to the water pump. A heavy iron kettle hit the stove top. "Good morning," I said. The movement stopped. Complete silence. Then, a single firm tap of a boot against the floorboards. "Yes, I hear you." "Hello." I took a breath. "I would like to make the coffee," I said. I heard him shift his weight, a hesitation. I didn't wait for permission. I walked forward. I kept my steps even. I reached out, finding the edge of the wooden table, trailing my fingers along it until I reached the counter beside the stove. I felt around. I found the tin of coffee grounds. I found the grinder. I reached for the iron kettle on the stove to check the water level. Before my fingers could touch the hot metal, a large, rough hand clamped over my wrist. Hard. I froze. He pulled my hand back, away from the stove. It wasn't a violent pull, but it was absolute. He let go, and I heard him pick up the kettle himself. He poured the water. He took the coffee tin from the counter right in front of me. He was doing it for me. My chest tightened. It was a familiar, suffocating feeling, the feeling of being erased. "Stop," I said. The grinding paused. I turned my face toward the sound of his breathing. My jaw set hard. "Put the grinder down, Mr. Dunn." A second passed. I heard the wooden base of the grinder hit the counter. "I know you think you are helping," I said. My voice was low, steady. I made sure it carried no anger, only absolute clarity. "You see a blind woman reaching for a hot stove, and your instinct is to protect her, to do it for her. I understand the impulse, but we need to get something straight right now." He didn't move. He was listening. "I am blind. I am not incapable," I said, spacing my words out so they hung in the quiet kitchen. "Over-helping is sometimes a subtle form of condescension. It tells me that you do not trust me to navigate my own life. Please don't do things for me that I can do myself." I waited for the silence to settle. I wanted the lesson to be absolutely clear. "Give me the chance to contribute," I continued, speaking directly into the quiet space between us. "Because true equality begins with acknowledging the other person's capabilities, not offering them pity. When you take the task from my hands, you take my agency. You turn me back into the helpless burden the wagon train left behind. I will burn my fingers once or twice. That is the price of learning my way around this kitchen. But it is my price to pay, not yours to prevent." Silence. The cedar wood popped in the stove. I held my ground. I didn't lower my chin. I heard him step closer, the smell of old leather and morning frost wrapped around me. He took my right hand. He didn't pull it away from the stove this time. He guided it forward. He moved my hand until my fingertips brushed the cold wooden handle of the coffee grinder. He wrapped my fingers around it. Then he let go. He stepped back. It was a small movement, but it was everything. I took a shaky breath. I turned the handle. The beans crunched. The rich, bitter smell of coffee filled the air. I measured the grounds by feeling the weight in the tin scoop. I found the kettle. I felt the radiant heat rolling off the iron. I kept my hand an inch above the metal, tracking the heat until I found the handle. I poured. We drank our coffee at the table, in silence. But the silence had changed. It was no longer a heavy testing thing. It was just quiet. That evening, the sun dropped fast. The house grew cold. I sat at the table, running my fingers over the edge of a piece of paper. We had mail to sort. Elias had a stack of letters from the supply store in town. He sat across from me. I heard him pull his chair in. "I am ready," I said. He reached across the table. He took my hand. Earlier that day, his tracing had been light, ghostly, hard to follow. This time it was different. He took his index finger and pressed it deeply into the center of my palm. He dragged it slowly, deliberately. He was carving the letters into my skin, giving them weight and shape. F-L-O-U-R, flower, T-E-N, 10. D-O-L-L-A-R-S, dollars. He was adapting. He had listened to me. He had realized that a light touch wasn't enough for me to read him clearly, so he changed his method. He gave his words physical weight so I wouldn't have to struggle. $10 for flour, I said aloud. I'll write the ledger. I pulled the ledger book toward me. I used a straight piece of wood as a guide, keeping my pen steady on the lines. We worked like that for an hour, him tracing deep, undeniable letters into my hand, me speaking them aloud, then writing them down. Two halves of a whole, building a bridge out of touch and ink. When we were done, I stood up. I was tired. The mental strain of translating touch to letters to spoken words was heavy. "Good night, Mr. Dunn," I said. He tapped the table once. I walked down the hall. I went into my room. I closed the door. I stood there for a moment in the dark. I listened. Footsteps approached my door. They stopped. Then a sound. Knock. Knock. Two sharp, clear raps on the wood. He wasn't trying to come in. He was just letting me know he was there. He was respecting the boundary of the door. He was giving me the choice to acknowledge him or ignore him. Equality. I reached out and laid my palm flat against the door. I didn't turn the heavy iron key in the lock. I left it open. I walked to my bed and lay down, listening to his footsteps fade back into the kitchen. Late fall in the Wyoming territory doesn't ease in. It drops on you like a hammer. The air turned brittle. It smelled sharp, like ozone and dying grass. The ground froze overnight, turning the mud in the corral into hard, jagged ruts that twisted my ankles if I didn't step careful. Elias was out mending the western fence line. I was alone at the house. I didn't like sitting still. Sitting still bred memories, and my memories were mostly full of loud, crowded cities and people talking over my head. I needed to move. I needed to map the perimeter of my new world. I put on a heavy wool coat. I found my walking stick, a smooth length of hickory Elias had left leaning by the door. I walked out the back of the house. I found the wooden rail of the horse corral with my left hand. I followed it. The smell of the ranch was familiar now. Horses, hay, the sharp tang of pine needles, the smoky scent of the chimney. But as I walked past the edge of the corral, heading toward a small rise in the east, the smell changed. I stopped. I lifted my chin, letting the cold wind hit my face. The scent of pine faded. The smell of fresh hay disappeared. Instead, the air grew heavy. It smelled like old ash, cold, wet iron, and something deeper, something that smelled like sour earth and decay that hadn't quite finished rotting. I tapped my stick forward. It didn't hit frozen mud. It hit something hard, something that rang with a dull, flat thud. Stone. I knelt down. I took my gloves off and pressed my bare hands into the freezing dirt. My fingers traced the edges. It was a foundation. Hewn stone laid in a straight line. Unnatural. The earth here felt different. It was packed too tight. Ash was mixed into the topsoil. It coated my fingertips in a fine, greasy grit. This wasn't an abandoned homestead. Abandoned places smell hollow. They smell like wind and dust. This place smelled like a wound. Someone had burned a building here, and they had buried something beneath it. "You have good ears, but better hands." The voice came from my right. It was deep, weathered. It sounded like cracked leather. I didn't jump. I stayed on my knees, my hands on the cold stone. I hadn't heard him approach. Not a single snapping twig, not a rustle of grass. "Who's there?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "A man who remembers what used to stand where you are kneeling," the voice said. I stood up slowly. I brushed the dirt from my skirt. I turned toward the sound. "You step quieter than any man I've ever met. You aren't from the town." "No," he said. A pause. "My name is Nakoda. My people grazed cattle in this valley before the men with paper deeds came." I nodded slowly. An Indian, an elder, judging by the slight rasp in his breath. "You are the woman the silent man brought," Nakoda said. "The one with the dead eyes." "My eyes don't work," I corrected gently. "But they aren't dead, and I see quite a bit." I heard the soft shift of moccasins on frozen dirt. He was stepping closer. He smelled of sage and old wood smoke. "You see the stones," Nakoda said softly. "Do you see what is underneath them?" "I smell it," I said truthfully. "It smells like grief. And fire." A long silence hung between us. The wind whipped my skirt against my legs. "You're a silent man," Nakoda said, his voice dropping lower. "He bought this land, but he did not shed the blood that stains it. Not with his own hands. But his words helped dig the graves." My breath caught in my throat. Elias is past. The reason he stopped speaking. "He was a translator," Nakoda continued, "for the army. He spoke promises to us, good land, safe passage. He used his voice to convince us to move. We moved. It was a lie. The new land was poison. Many died. Children died. When he learned the truth, he stopped talking. He bought this broken piece of land, and he built his house next to the ashes of what the army destroyed, to punish himself." I gripped my walking stick. The cold was seeping into my bones, but the chill in my chest was worse. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he cannot hear me," Nakoda said simply. "He is drowning in his own silence. He thinks his guilt is a virtue. It is not. But you live in the dark. You know what it means to have things taken from you." "Yes," I said quietly. "Then tell him," Nakoda said. His voice was fading. He was already walking away. "Tell him that a closed mouth does not feed the hungry, and a blind eye does not bury the dead." I stood alone by the stones for a long time. That evening the house was warm, but the space between me and Elias felt incredibly vast. We sat at the table. He reached out to take my hand for our evening spelling. I pulled my hand back. I heard him shift, a question in the silence. "I walked past the corral today," I said, "to the east where the ground changes." The sudden stillness from his side of the table was absolute. He stopped breathing. "I found the stones. The old foundation," I said. "And I met a man named Nakoda." I heard the chair scrape violently against the floorboards as Elias stood up. His heavy boots took a rapid step back. He was retreating. The shame was suffocating him. "Sit down, Elias," I said. It was the first time I'd used his given name. He didn't move. I stood up. I walked around the table. I navigated by the sound of his ragged, shallow breathing. I stopped right in front of him. I reached out and found his chest. I pressed my hands flat against his heavy wool shirt. His heart was hammering like a trapped animal's. "Listen to me," I said. My voice was firm, demanding. "Nakoda told me what happened. He told me what you did, what your translations led to." He flinched. He tried to turn away, but I held my hands flat against his chest. "Don't run from this," I said fiercely. "You took a vow of silence because you think it's a penance. You think by not speaking, you can never hurt anyone again. But you are wrong." I took a deep breath. I needed to say this perfectly. I needed to give him the truth, spoken aloud, where it couldn't hide in the dark. "They were stripped of their voice and their land," I said, spacing my words like I was striking an anvil. and I was stripped of my sight. We know what it means to have the world take our power. But this earth does not discriminate. It only remembers the truth. And the truth is, your silence does not help them. It only protects you from the pain of trying again. His breathing hitched. A rough, jagged sound in his throat. You made a mistake, I continued, my voice softening just a fraction but losing none of its steel. You trusted the wrong men. But kindness is never too late to mend the injustices you have witnessed. Your silence is a coward's peace, Elias. You need to use your life, and eventually your voice, to rebuild what you helped tear down. Punishing yourself does not bring back the dead. Helping the living does. I dropped my hands from his chest. I stood there in the quiet kitchen. Slowly, haltingly, I felt his hand reach out. He didn't take my palm. He rested his heavy, calloused hand gently on my shoulder. A terrifying, vulnerable weight. He was trembling. He didn't have the words yet. He didn't have his voice, but the touch was a promise, a crack in the stone wall he had built around himself. Tomorrow, I said softly, you will show me exactly where those stones end, and we will figure out what to do with them. His hand tightened on my shoulder. Once. Firmly. Yes. Winter didn't start with snow. It started with rain. 3 days of it, freezing, relentless water falling from a slate-gray sky. I couldn't see the clouds, but I could feel the terrible weight of them pressing down on the roof. The house leaked in 2 places. We kept the fire high. On the 4th night, the sound of the rain changed. It wasn't just hitting the roof anymore, it was rushing, a low, violent hum vibrating through the floorboards. Flash flood. The dry creek bed 1/2 mile east had breached its banks. Elias was out of his chair before I even stood up. I heard the heavy scrape of wood, the clatter of his boots, the rustle of his oilskin coat. I grabbed my heavy shawl. I found my boots by the door. He touched my shoulder, a quick, sharp tap. Stay. I reached out and grabbed the wet canvas of his sleeve. No, you can't see everything in the dark. I can hear where the water is moving fastest. I'm coming. He hesitated. The wind howled against the door. Then his hand slid down my arm and gripped my wrist. He pulled me out into the storm. The cold was a physical blow. It knocked the breath out of my lungs. The rain felt like gravel hitting my face. I clung to his arm. We walked. He was my eyes against the mud and the debris. I was his ears. I pointed him away from the deep rushing sounds that meant washed-out gullies. We moved toward the East Ridge, toward the old stone foundation I had found weeks ago. The ground beneath my boots turned slick, then soft. Then it wasn't ground at all. It was deep, sliding muck. Elias stopped dead. He stopped so suddenly I stumbled into his side. He was rigid. His breathing, usually so measured, turned jagged. He was looking at something. "Elias?" I shouted over the wind. He didn't move. He didn't tap my hand. I let go of his arm. I dropped to my knees in the freezing mud. The water was rushing fast here, tearing away the topsoil. I reached my hands out into the rushing water and the thick sludge. My fingers brushed against something hard, smooth, curved. It wasn't a stone. It was bone. I dug deeper, my hands going numb in the icy water. I found another piece, and another. A massive rib cage. A skull. Not human. Cattle. And something else. A piece of metal. Heavy iron, half buried in the mud. I dragged my thumb over the surface. It was deeply engraved. I could feel the raised letters under the muck. BIA Bureau of Indian Affairs. The flood hadn't just washed away the dirt. It had washed away the lie. It had unearthed the mass grave of the Nakota herd. The herd Elias had been ordered to condemn. The herd he had helped bury. I stood up. The rain was deafening, but the silence radiating from Elias was louder. He was standing right beside me. I could hear his chest heaving, a terrible ragged sound. He was breaking, right there in the rain. I reached out and grabbed the front of his oilskin coat. I held on tight. "Nakota told me," I yelled over the storm. "He told me about the translations. He told me about the land they were promised, the bad land. He told me about the cattle the army killed to starve them out." Elias shook his head. I felt the violent motion through his coat. He was trying to pull away. He was trying to retreat into the dark. I didn't let go. I pulled myself closer to him. "Did you know?" I demanded. He reached for my hand. He tried to trace letters on my wet palm. His hands were shaking so hard I couldn't feel the shapes. It was just frantic, desperate scratching. "No!" I shouted. I grabbed both of his wrists and held them still. "No chalkboard, no tracing, not for this." He froze. "You hide in the quiet, Elias. You think it keeps you clean. It doesn't." I tipped my face up, letting the freezing rain wash over me. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid of the ugly truth. "I need to hear it, not feel it. Hear it." I squeezed his wrists. "Did you help them do this?" The wind screamed, the water rushed over the bones at our feet, seconds bled away. I waited. I would have stood there until I froze to death. Then I felt a vibration deep in his chest, a sound tearing its way up his throat, like a rusted nail being pulled from old wood. It was rough. It was broken. It was the sound of a man bleeding out from the inside. Yes. One word. One terrible spoken word. He collapsed to his knees right there in the mud. He dropped his head. I could hear the rain hitting the back of his coat. He was entirely defeated. I knelt down in the mud beside him. I didn't offer pity. Pity is useless. It doesn't fix a broken wheel, and it doesn't fix a broken man. I offered the only thing that mattered, the truth. I leaned in close so he could hear every word over the storm. "Listen to me," I said, my voice cutting sharp and clear through the rain. "The greatest mistake a man makes is not the wrong action itself. We are all fools when we are young. We all trust the wrong people." He didn't move. "The real crime," I continued, speaking the words like gospel, "is the silence and the avoidance that follows. You thought punishing yourself by losing your voice was noble. It wasn't. It was hiding." I found his face in the dark. I rested my cold hands on his wet, stubbled cheeks. I forced him to keep his head up. "When you said yes to me just now, you took your first real breath in years," I told him. "You began your journey to actual freedom. Do you understand me? The truth is the only medicine for a bleeding conscience. You cannot bury your mistakes in the mud, Elias. The rain will always wash the dirt away. You have to stand over them. You have to own them. And then you have to use your life to make it right." He took a deep, shuddering breath. He reached up and wrapped his large, shaking hands over mine. He didn't speak again. But the grip of his hands told me everything. The wall had cracked. The ghost was finally out of the ground. January hit us like a falling tree. The rain turned to ice. The ice turned to snow. And then the wind came. It didn't stop for 3 weeks. We were completely cut off. Just the two of us inside the thick stone walls of the ranch house. The silence between us had changed since the night of the flood. It was no longer a barrier. It was a shared space. We moved around each other with an easy rhythm. I kneaded bread at the table. He oiled harnesses by the fire. He guided my hands to teach me how to check the tension on a saddle strap. I taught him how to tap the table to signal if a pot was boiling over. We communicated through touch, through rhythm, through the smell of cedar wood and baking yeast. Then, the great blizzard of '74 arrived. I heard it coming hours before it hit. The pressure in my ears dropped. The birds outside stopped making any sound at all. "It's going to be bad," I said, standing by the frosted window pane. Elias walked past me. He tapped my shoulder twice. "I know." He went out to string a rope line from the back door to the barn. A lifeline so he wouldn't get lost in the whiteout. By nightfall, the wind sounded like a freight train running right over the roof. The cold seeped through the stone. I sat close to the cast-iron stove, wrapped in 2 wool blankets. Around midnight, a sound cut through the howling wind. It was faint, dull, a weak thud against the heavy oak of the front door. I sat up straight. Elias, he was already moving. I heard the scrape of his chair, the heavy, hurried thud of his boots. He threw the deadbolt. The wind blasted into the room, bringing a swirl of freezing snow and a terrible, desperate cold. Then I heard Elias grunt, the heavy lifting of dead weight. He kicked the door shut. The wind was cut off, leaving a ringing silence in my ears. "Put him by the stove," I said. I already knew it was a person. Nothing else knocks. I dropped my blankets. I moved fast. I didn't need to see. I knew exactly where the wash basin was, where the clean rags were, where the kettle of hot water sat on the back of the stove. Elias laid the body on the rug. I knelt beside it. I reached out. I felt small shoulders, a thin, frail chest, a child. His clothes were frozen solid, like a suit of armor made of ice. His skin felt like marble. He wasn't shivering. That was bad. When you stop shivering, the cold is winning. Elias didn't wait for instructions. He pulled his heavy hunting knife and cut the frozen clothes away. "Hot water," Elias traced frantically on my arm. "No," I said sharply. "Warm, just warm. Hot water will shock his heart. It will kill him." We worked together. We were a machine of pure survival. Elias rubbed the boy's legs, forcing the blood to move. I dipped rags in lukewarm water and pressed them to the boy's chest, his neck, his face. I traced his features with my fingertips. A small nose, high cheekbones, a jagged raised scar over his left eyebrow. An hour passed. 2. My knees ached from the hard floor. Finally a sound, a tiny rattling intake of breath, then a violent shiver. "He's back," I whispered. I wrapped him in my heavy wool blankets. Elias lifted him gently and placed him in the large rocking chair near the fire. We sat on the floor beside him, listening to the agonizingly slow return of his breathing. It was near dawn when the boy finally woke. The storm outside was still raging, but the house was warm. I heard the rustle of the blankets, a sharp gasp of panic. "It's all right," I said softly, keeping my voice low and rhythmic. "You are safe, you are warm. No one is going to hurt you here." "Where?" The voice was small, cracked. "Where is this?" "The Dunn Ranch," I said. "I am Marin. This is Elias." "Tommy," the boy croaked. "I'm Tommy." I reached out slowly, letting him see my hand coming. I found his blanket-covered knee and rested my hand there. "Why were you out in that storm, Tommy?" Silence. I could hear his rapid heartbeat. "The man at the livery stable," Tommy whispered. "Where I slept. He gets mean when he drinks. He said he was going to take a belt to me. So I ran. I just ran. I didn't know the snow was going to get so bad." He started to cry. Not loud weeping. Just the silent, desperate tears of a child who thinks he is entirely alone in the world. "He's going to come find me," Tommy sobbed. "When the snow stops, he'll take me back. I don't have nobody else." I felt Elias shift beside me. A heavy, protective anger radiated from him. I squeezed Tommy's knee. I leaned forward, making sure my voice carried the absolute weight of a promise. "He will not take you back," I said. Tommy sniffled. "You don't know him. He has papers. He says he owns my labor. He says I ain't got real family, so I belong to him." "Listen to me, Tommy," I said. I needed him to hear this. I needed to say it out loud so it would become real for all three of us. Family isn't necessarily bound by blood. Blood is just an accident of birth. It doesn't mean love, and it doesn't mean safety. I moved my hand up, finding his cold, small hand. I held it between both of mine. "Family is a choice," I told him, speaking the words clearly, like I was reading a law into existence. "Family is a place where broken souls piece themselves together to protect one another. You do not need to share a name to share a home. You do not need working eyes to see who truly cares for you. You only need an open heart and a willingness to stand your ground." I paused, letting the warmth of the fire settle over the words. "That man in town owns a piece of paper. He does not own you. You chose to survive. You chose to run toward the light in our window, and we choose to keep you." I felt a large, rough hand cover mine. Elias. He was holding my hand, which was holding Tommy's. 3 people anchored together in the dark. "Do you understand me, Tommy?" I asked. A small, trembling breath. Then I felt him squeeze my fingers. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "Good," I said. I let out a long breath. "Now, go to sleep. The storm will pass. And when it does, we will be right here." Spring didn't arrive quietly. It came violently. It started with a sound like a rifle shot, a sharp, echoing crack in the middle of the night. It was the ice breaking on the creek. By morning, the whole world sounded like moving water. The snowmelt rushed off the roof. It dripped from the eaves. The hard, frozen ground turned into a thick, sucking mud. I could hear it pulling at the horses' hooves when Elias led them out of the barn. Inside the house, things had changed, too. The quiet was gone. Tommy filled the empty spaces. He was 11 years old, and he moved like a startled bird, fast, unpredictable. But he was eager to please. He chopped the kindling. He carried the water. He talked to the horses in a low, soothing voice that he had copied directly from Elias. We were a strange kind of whole, a silent man, a blind woman, an orphaned boy. It was mid-morning when the new sound arrived. I was on the porch mending a tear in a wool blanket. My fingers were tracking the stitches. Then I heard it. Wheels, but not heavy wagon wheels crushing the gravel. These were narrow, iron-rimmed but light. They moved fast. The suspension of the carriage didn't squeak. It was well-oiled, expensive. And the horses, a matched pair. Their trot was perfectly synchronized. This wasn't a local rancher coming to trade seed. This was money. The carriage pulled into the yard and stopped. A man stepped down. His boots hit the mud with a light, practiced step. He didn't drag his heels. "Hello, the house," the man called out. His voice was smooth, like warm oil poured over glass. Every syllable was perfectly pronounced. He had the kind of voice that was designed to make you feel comfortable while it picked your pocket. I stood up. I folded my hands in front of my apron. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I certainly hope so," he said. He walked toward the porch. I smelled him before he reached the bottom step. Bay rum aftershave, starched cotton, a faint hint of expensive cigar smoke. "My name is Harold Cross. I represent the Western Pacific Land Consortium." Elias came around the corner of the house. I knew his heavy, measured stride instantly. He stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs, placing himself firmly between Cross and me. "You must be Mr. Dunn," Cross said. The smile in his voice was thick. "I've been looking over the county registry. It seems there are some irregularities with your original homestead filing." I heard Elias shift his weight. The slow, dry scrape of chalk on slate. He held the board out. I heard Cross chuckle. A tight, condescending sound. "I see. The rumors in town are true. You really don't speak." "Well, Mr. Dunn, I'll make this simple. The railroad is looking to expand its spur line right through this valley. Your claim has clerical errors. My consortium is willing to overlook those errors and buy this land from you at a very fair price. It saves you a lengthy court battle you cannot win." More scratching on the slate. A sharp, definitive tap. "No," Cross read. He sighed. "Mr. Dunn, you are a man who struggles to communicate. You have a blind woman to care for. You have a stray child running around your yard. This is a harsh country. Take the money. Move somewhere easier." Elias didn't write anything else. He just stood there, immovable, like a mountain of stone. "I'll leave my card," Cross said, his voice dropping a fraction of its warmth. "Think it over. I'll be in town for the week." Cross climbed back into his carriage. He didn't leave, though. I heard him pull the horses around toward the barn, supposedly to check the trail line. Elias followed him. I went back to my chair. I picked up my mending. 10 minutes later, I heard light footsteps approaching the back of the porch. Not Elias, not Tommy. It was Cross. He had circled back while Elias was busy near the pasture. He stepped up onto the wood. He stopped a few feet from my chair. "Miss Voss, isn't it?" Cross said softly. "The labor broker in town mentioned you. A tragic story, left behind by your own wagon train." I kept my hands moving over the wool blanket. "I am not a tragedy, Mr. Cross. I am busy. State your business." He laughed, a soft, polished sound. "I like you. You're practical. So I will be blunt. This land is going to belong to my consortium. Whether Dunn sells it or the courts take it due to the filing errors, it's inevitable." He took a step closer. The smell of bay rum was overpowering. "Your labor contract with him is void. You are legally a vagrant," Cross said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "When he loses this ranch, he won't be able to protect you, or the boy. You will be back on the street, blind and alone." I stopped sewing. I turned my face directly toward the sound of his breathing. "But," Cross continued smoothly, "if you were to help me, if you were to convince him to sign the papers, I would personally ensure you receive $200, cash, just for you. You could go to Denver, San Francisco, you could live comfortably. You don't owe this silent, broken man anything." He reached out. I felt the crisp edge of heavy paper brush against the back of my hand. Banknotes. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I sat perfectly still. The wind shifted. It blew the smell of the melting snow and the damp pine needles across the porch. It smelled like survival, like hard, honest work. I stood up. I let the wool blanket fall to the floorboards. "Put your money away, Mr. Cross," I said. My voice was calm. It was not loud, but it was harder than the iron rims on his carriage wheels. $200 is a fortune for a woman in your position," he pressed, a hint of irritation finally breaking through his smooth veneer. "My position?" I asked. I took a step toward him. He instinctively stepped back. "Do you think my darkness is a weakness for you to exploit?" "On the contrary, Mr. Cross, because I cannot see your expensive suit. I cannot see your charming smile or your polished boots. Because I am blind to your presentation, I can hear the absolute rot in your words." He breathed in sharply. I didn't stop. I needed to make this painfully clear. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, spacing my words out so they struck like hammer blows. "Human loyalty is not something you can bargain for with dirty dollars. You look at me, and you see a helpless woman who can be bought. You look at Mr. Dunn and see a mute who can be bullied. But true integrity doesn't care about your money or your threats. Doing the right thing is not a transaction." I pointed a finger straight at his chest. I couldn't see him, but I knew exactly where his heart should be. "I choose to stay with a man who gave me respect when I had nothing. I choose this family because we honor each other's humanity. That is worth more than all the banknotes in your pocket. Do not ever approach me with a bribe again." Silence, heavy and tense. Then I heard the sharp, distinct sound of Elias's boots stepping onto the far end of the porch. He had heard. Cross cleared his throat. The smooth confidence was gone. It was replaced by a tight, brittle anger. "You are making a terrible mistake, Miss Voss. Both of you." He turned on his heel. He walked to his carriage. The whip cracked loud against the horses' backs. The carriage tore out of the yard, the wheels throwing heavy, wet mud in every direction. I stood on the porch listening until the sound of the hooves faded completely into the wind. Elias walked up beside me. He didn't take out his chalkboard. He didn't need to. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was firm, solid. It felt like the roots of a very old tree. We had drawn a line in the mud, and the real fight was just beginning. Summer arrived like a punishment. The spring mud baked into cracked white clay. The prairie grass turned brittle and yellow before June was half over. The wind stopped bringing the smell of pine and started carrying nothing but hot, choking dust. A drought. A bad one. I could feel the lack of moisture in my own skin. The air felt thin and sharp in my lungs. Every morning I listened to Elias go to the well. I listened to the wooden bucket drop down the stone shaft. Usually it hit the water with a heavy, echoing splash. But as the weeks dragged on, the drop took longer. The splash grew hollow, weak. By the middle of July, the sound changed completely. I was standing on the porch, holding a tin cup, waiting for Tommy to bring the morning water. I heard the crank turning. I heard the rope groaning. Then a dull, scraping thud, wood hitting dry rock. Tommy ran back to the porch. His breathing was fast and panicked. He pressed the tin bucket against my hands. "Miss Marin," he gasped. "It's gone. The water is gone." I reached into the bucket. My fingertips found a tiny puddle at the bottom, barely half a cup. I scooped it up and touched it to my tongue. It was thick, gritty. It tasted overwhelmingly of raw iron and stale earth. It tasted like the bottom of the world. Elias came out of the barn. He walked to the well. He didn't need me to tell him. He knew. A ranch without water is a graveyard waiting to happen. The creek was already a trickle. The cattle were growing restless, their lowing turning into a harsh, desperate sound that carried for miles. We had to dig. Elias picked a spot 50 yards closer to the dried creek bed. For 5 days, the rhythm of the ranch became nothing but the sound of iron striking baked earth. Clink, thud, scrape. Elias swung the pickaxe. Tommy shoveled the loose dirt into a canvas bucket. I stood at the top, hauling the heavy bucket up hand over hand, dumping the dirt and lowering it back down. My hands bled. The rope tore through my calluses. The sun beat down on my shoulders like a physical weight. But I didn't stop. We didn't stop. By the 6th day, they were 20 feet down. The air coming up from the holes smelled dank, but still no water. I was lowering the bucket when I heard Elias's pickaxe strike something different. It wasn't the dull thud of hard clay. It wasn't the sharp crack of shale. It was a dense, ringing sound, like hitting a solid block of lead. Elias stopped. I heard him digging with his hands, scraping the dirt away. "What is it?" Tommy asked, his voice echoing up the narrow shaft. "Is it wet?" Elias didn't answer. He loaded something into the bucket. He tugged the rope twice. "Pull." I hauled it up. It was heavy, unbelievably heavy for a bucket that wasn't full of water. I pulled it over the edge and reached inside. It was rock, but the texture was wrong. It was jagged but surprisingly smooth in patches. It felt greasy to the touch. I brought a piece close to my face. I smelled it. It smelled metallic, sharp. I rubbed my thumb over the surface, grinding a bit of the loose dust onto my skin. I brought my thumb to my tongue and tasted it. It was a bitter, metallic tang. It coated the roof of my mouth. It tasted like greed. "Tommy," I called down, "tell me what this rock looks like." Tommy scrambled up the rope ladder. He climbed over the edge, panting, covered in dust. He took the rock from my hand. He gasped. "Miss Marin," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's shining. It's got yellow veins all through it. Heavy yellow veins." Gold. We had struck a vein of gold ore right beneath the cattle pasture. Elias climbed up a moment later. He stood beside us, breathing hard. I held the rock out to him. I felt his large hand close over it. Suddenly, everything made sense, like a lock clicking perfectly into place. "Cross," I breathed. Elias tapped my arm once. "The railroad was a lie," I said, the anger rising hot in my chest. The clerical errors were a lie. He didn't want this land for a train. He had a geologist survey this valley. He knew the vein was here. He was trying to steal a gold mine for $200 and a threat. Tommy was vibrating with excitement. He grabbed my sleeve. "We're rich, Miss Marin, we're rich. We can build a huge house. We can go to the city. We can buy anything we want. Mr. Elias won't ever have to work again." He was dancing around the dirt pile. A child who had starved most of his life suddenly handed the key to the kingdom. I didn't smile. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I knelt down in the dust. I reached out and caught Tommy by the shoulders, stopping his dance. "Tommy, stop! Listen to me." He froze. "But we found gold." "I know," I said gently, but my voice was absolute. "And I know what gold does to men." I took the rock from Elias's hand. I held it out between us. "I need you to hear this, Tommy, and I need you to understand it for the rest of your life," I said. I made sure Elias was listening too. "Gold can build grand houses, Tommy. It can buy fancy suits and fast horses. But it also attracts men who are willing to kill, steal, and burn everything to the ground to take it from you. Wealth like this doesn't bring peace. It brings a target." I dropped the heavy rock back into the dirt at our feet. It landed with a dull, ugly thud. "True wealth," I continued, speaking clearly to both the boy and the silent man beside me, "is not pulled from the dirt in shiny pieces. True wealth is simply having a peaceful piece of earth where we can live decently with one another. It is going to sleep at night knowing the people in your house are safe. It is waking up with your dignity intact. If we start digging for this, we stop being a family. We become guards over a vault." I stood up. I faced Elias. "I won't trade our lives for a rock," I said. Elias stepped forward. He didn't write anything. He didn't tap my hand. He reached down, picked up the shovel, and scooped a pile of dry clay. He dumped it right back down the hole. He was burying it. Tommy let out a small, disappointed sigh, but he didn't argue. He picked up his own small shovel and started pushing the dirt back in. We spent the rest of the day filling in the hole. We buried the fortune. We kept our peace. That evening, the clouds finally broke. A slow, steady rain began to fall. The smell of wet earth filled the air, sweeter than any gold in the world. We had made our choice. But I knew Harold Cross hadn't made his. The fight wasn't over. He knew what was under our boots, and he was coming back to take it. August in Wyoming does not forgive. The heat pressed down on the roof like a physical weight. The air was entirely still. It smelled of baked dust and dry pine needles. Even the horses in the corral had stopped shifting. They just stood, heads low, enduring. I was sitting at the kitchen table. My fingers were tracing the raised edges of a wax seal on a document I had drafted 3 weeks ago. Then the dog started barking, a frantic, sharp sound. I heard the horses, 4 of them, heavy hoofbeats, the jingle of spurs and the creak of saddle leather. "Stay inside, Tommy." Elias tapped on my shoulder as he walked past me. I didn't need him to trace it. I knew the rhythm of his hands now. I stood up. I picked up my stack of papers. I followed him out onto the porch. The heat hit my face instantly. I tracked the sound of the riders pulling up in the yard. I smelled the horses' sweat. I smelled polished leather. And I smelled bay rum. Harold Cross had returned. And he hadn't come alone. "Afternoon, Mr. Dunn," a new voice boomed. It was deep, rough around the edges, a voice used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "I'm U.S. Marshal Vance. I have a writ of eviction here signed by the county judge." I heard Elias step forward. His boots were heavy on the dry dirt. He didn't offer his chalkboard. He just stood there. "The consortium has filed a formal claim," Cross added. His voice was smooth, but I could hear the smugness dripping from it. "Your original homestead patent is invalid. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." "Hand me the paper," I said. I stepped off the porch. I walked right up to where the horses were breathing hard in the heat. "Miss Voss," Cross sighed, "this is legal business, not women's business." "Hand me the paper," I repeated. I heard paper rustle. The marshal leaned down from his saddle and pushed the thick parchment into my hands. I ran my fingers over the edges. It felt official. It felt heavy. I didn't try to read it. I didn't need to. I held it up in the hot air. "Marshal Vance," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to carry across the yard. "This writ is based on a claim of clerical error. Am I correct?" "That's right, ma'am," the marshal said. "Then this writ is suspended," I replied. I held out my own stack of papers. 3 weeks ago, I filed an injunction with the Federal Land Office in Denver. I have the receipt of delivery right here. Federal review supersedes county eviction. You cannot force us off this land while the federal office is reviewing the original survey markers. Total silence fell over the yard. Cross urged his horse a step forward. That is a stall tactic. You have no legal standing. You are a blind woman and he is a mute who bought you. What kind of family claims this land? My grip on the papers tightened. The anger in my chest burned hotter than the August sun. I am going to explain something to you, Mr. Cross, I said. I turned my face directly toward him. And I want the marshal to hear it too. I spaced my words perfectly. The law was written to protect the vulnerable, not to serve as a weapon for the powerful to steal with impunity. You think because Elias cannot speak, and because I cannot see, that we are lesser, that our rights are negotiable. They are not. We have an equal right to exist on this land through our own honest labor. Equality under the law does not depend on a man's voice or a woman's eyes. It depends on our shared humanity. The marshal shifted in his saddle. She's got a point, Cross. If she filed a federal injunction, my hands are tied until a judge in Denver rules on it. I can't throw them out today. This is ridiculous, Cross snapped. He can't even speak to defend his own claim. Look at him, he's broken. I felt the air shift. Elias stepped past me. He walked right up to Cross's horse. The horse whinnied and stepped back. I couldn't see Elias's face, but I could feel the absolute terrifying stillness radiating from him. He reached up and grabbed the leather bridle of Cross's horse, pulling the animal down. Then a sound tore through the dry, hot air. It was rough. It was scraped raw. It sounded like two heavy stones grinding together. It was the voice of a man who had not spoken in anger in nearly a decade. "This land is mine." The words hung in the heat, heavy, undeniable. "I filed for it," Elias said. Every word was a physical effort. "I built on it. I bled on it. And no agent, no railroad, and no court is taking it while I'm standing on it." Cross didn't say a word. I heard his horse backing up fast. "Let's go, Cross," the marshal said quietly. "We'll wait for the federal judge." They turned their horses. They rode out. I stood in the yard. My heart was hammering. Elias stood a few feet away. I could hear his ragged, exhausted breathing. Speaking those words had cost him everything. We walked back into the house. Elias didn't sit down. He walked straight to his desk. I heard the drawer slide open. I heard him shuffling papers. He walked back to the kitchen table. He placed a piece of paper in front of me. I touched it. It was old. The edges were worn. It was my $40 labor contract. He put a heavy pen in my hand. Then he took my hand and guided it. He didn't trace letters on my palm. He guided my pen across the paper. He drew a thick, heavy line right through the center of the contract, tearing the paper slightly with the force of the ink. Then he placed a new sheet of paper under my fingers. It was the official deed to the ranch. He guided my hand to the bottom line, and he helped me sign my name. He picked up his chalkboard. He wrote fast. He pushed it into my hands. Co-owner. Equal. I traced the letters. The chalk dust coated my fingertips. "Elias," I whispered. He reached out. He placed his rough, scarred hand over mine. It was a promise. We were standing our ground. Together. The dream was always the same. I was standing on a dock in Boston. I could smell the salt air. I could hear the seagulls. Then the salt turned bitter. The air grew thick. I woke up coughing. My lungs burned. My eyes, though useless, watered violently. I sat up in bed. The room was incredibly hot, smoke. I threw off the blankets. I hit the floor running. "Elias!" I screamed. My door burst open before I could reach it. Two heavy hands grabbed my shoulders. "Elias!" He was coughing, a deep, hacking sound. He pulled me into the hallway. The roar of the fire was deafening. It sounded like a hurricane made of pure heat. The wooden floorboards under my bare feet were terrifyingly warm. "Tommy!" I yelled. Elias tapped my shoulder twice. "He has him." I felt a small, trembling hand grab my nightgown. Tommy was crying. Elias pushed us toward the front door. We spilled out onto the dirt yard. The heat outside was worse. The prairie was burning. The dry grass we had suffered through all summer was going up like kindling. The wind was whipping the flames directly toward the barn. I heard the horses screaming, a high, unnatural sound of pure panic. Elias let go of me. He ran toward the barn. "Stay here," I shouted to Tommy. I couldn't fight the fire, I couldn't see the flames, but I could hear the house behind me. The roof shingles were starting to pop and crack. The stone walls would stand, but the inside, the wood, the furniture, everything we owned was going to burn. The gold. The collapsed mine shaft was out back. The wooden supports would burn. The earth would cave in completely. The gold would be buried forever under tons of scorched rock. I didn't care about the gold. I turned back toward the house. "Miss Marin, no!" Tommy screamed. I ignored him. I ran back onto the porch. The heat blistered my cheeks. I navigated purely by memory. 7 steps to the kitchen table. Turn right. 5 steps to the desk. The smoke was blindingly thick. I dropped to my knees, crawling under the worst of it. I found the desk. I pulled the bottom drawer open. My hands scrambled blindly over the wood. Papers, inkwells, ledgers. There, a thick, leather-bound book. Elias's journal. The place where he wrote everything he couldn't say. I grabbed it. I held it tight against my chest. I turned and crawled back toward the door. The heat was searing my back. I threw myself out the front door, tumbling down the porch steps into the dirt, just as a section of the roof collapsed inward with a massive crash. I lay in the dirt, coughing, clutching the leather book. An hour later, the wind died down. The fire moved on, leaving nothing but ruin behind. Dawn broke. I couldn't see the sun, but I felt the weak warmth on my skin. The air smelled of wet ash and total devastation. Elias walked over to me. His boots crunched on the charred earth. He sat heavily in the dirt beside me. Tommy sat on my other side. "The barn is gone," Tommy whispered, his voice completely flat. "The pasture is black, the mine shaft caved in, the gold is buried, it's all gone." I heard Elias let out a long, ragged breath. It was a sound of complete defeat. He had lost the land he had bought with his life savings. He had lost his redemption. I turned toward him. I reached out and found his arm. I slid my hand down until I found his large, calloused hand. I took the leather journal from my lap. I pressed it firmly into his palm. He went perfectly still. I felt his fingers trace the edge of the leather cover. "The gold under the ground might be lost, Elias," I said. My voice was raspy from the smoke, but it was steady. "The wood might be burned. The barn might be gone." I reached up and touched his soot-covered cheek. "But I need you to understand this," I told him. "Your voice, your soul in these pages, is something no fire can burn. Cross thought he could destroy us by burning our property, but he is a fool." I squeezed his hand around the book. "We do not build a life on gold, Elias. We do not build it on lumber. We start with the human spirit. Material assets can be stolen. They can be burned. But integrity and love and the truth of who you are, that is fireproof. We will rebuild, and we will rebuild from the inside out." He didn't write anything. He didn't tap my hand. He just pulled me against his chest. He buried his face in my hair, holding me tighter than he ever had, holding the journal against my back. Then we heard horses, many horses, unshod hooves. I sat up. "Nakoda," Elias whispered. His voice was rough, but it was there. "We saw the smoke," Nakoda's deep voice carried over the ash. I heard the sound of wagons pulling up. I heard the chatter of men and women. "We brought axes," Nakoda said, "and stone. Fire takes the weak wood. It leaves the strong rock behind. We will help you build." I smiled. The tears finally spilled over, cutting tracks through the soot on my face. Cross had tried to burn us out. Instead, he had burned away the last of the walls between us and the world. A year is a long time when you build it day by day. It was October again. The air was crisp. It smelled of ripe apples and fresh-cut pine. I was sitting on the front porch of the new house. It wasn't made of wood. It was built entirely of riverstone hauled by Nakota's people and Elias. It was smaller than the old house, but it felt immovable, like a fortress. Tommy was in the yard brushing down one of the horses. He was 12 now. His voice was starting to crack, and he laughed more than he stayed quiet. Cross was gone. The federal judge in Denver had thrown out his claim. A federal marshal had investigated the fire. They couldn't prove Cross lit the match, but the pressure was enough to run him entirely out of the Wyoming territory. We had kept the gold a secret. We left it buried in the collapsed shaft. We raised cattle instead. It was harder work, but it was honest, and it let us sleep at night. I heard the sound of a wagon pulling into the yard. "It's Mrs. Carlson," Tommy yelled happily. Ingrid Carlson, our Swedish neighbor from 5 miles down the valley, climbed down from her wagon. She smelled of baked cinnamon and strong lye soap. "Marin," Ingrid called out, walking heavily up the porch steps. "I brought bread and apples from the new harvest." "Thank you, Ingrid," I said, taking the heavy basket from her. She sat in the chair next to me. We listened to Tommy talking to the horses. "You have done a miracle here, Marin," Ingrid said softly. Her English was broken, but her meaning was always clear. "After the fire, I thought you would leave. I thought Elias would break." I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of my chair arm. "He didn't break," I said. "He just needed to remember how to bend." "People in town," Ingrid said, leaning closer, "they still talk. They do not understand how you do it. A woman who cannot see the world. A man who will not speak to it." I smiled. It was a peaceful smile. "That is exactly why it works, Ingrid," I told her. "I wanted her to take this back to the town. I wanted everyone to know. My blindness taught me how to look directly into a soul," I explained, speaking clearly and deliberately. "When you cannot see a man's face, you cannot be fooled by a handsome smile or an expensive suit. You are forced to judge him by the weight of his steps, the gentleness of his hands, and the consistency of his actions. I see Elias more clearly than anyone with perfect vision." I felt the autumn breeze lift my hair. "And his silence," I continued, "taught me how to listen to what truly matters. We spend so much time filling the air with useless words. Elias only speaks when it is absolutely necessary. It makes his truth undeniable. We are not perfect people, Ingrid. We have deep scars. But we are whole because we fiercely respect each other's differences. We do not demand that the other person be whole. We simply fill in the empty spaces for each other." Ingrid was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and patted my hand. "That is a good lesson," she said softly. "I will tell them." She stayed for tea. Then she drove her wagon back down the valley. Evening began to fall. The temperature dropped. I stood up from my chair and walked to the edge of the porch. I put my hand on the stone pillar. I heard Elias walking up from the barn. His boots sounded different now. The heavy, dragging gilt was gone from his stride. He walked with purpose. He walked like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. He stepped up onto the porch. He stopped right beside me. He didn't take my hand to write on my palm. He didn't pull out his chalkboard. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, facing the vast, cooling prairie. I smelled the cedar and the leather, mixed with the sharp scent of the coming winter. I felt him turn his head toward me. He reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand over mine on the stone pillar. "Stay." He spoke the word aloud. His voice was no longer rusted. It was deep. It was clear. It was absolute. It wasn't a command. It was a request. It was a vow. It held the weight of the fire, the flood, the long winter, and every silent moment we had shared. I turned my hand over, interlocking my fingers with his. "Always," I said. We stood there in the dark, watching the world together. He was my eyes, I was his voice, and on that quiet piece of earth, we were finally home. This is not just a story about survival in the Wild West. It's about dignity, redemption, and the courage to confront the truth. On this channel, we bring you stories of cowboys, Western love, motherhood, human compassion, and the quiet bonds that hold people together when everything else falls apart. The lesson here is simple but powerful. True freedom comes not from running from your past, but from facing it and choosing to rebuild with honesty and courage. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, share it with others, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. The story you are about to read is entirely fictional. While it may draw inspiration from universal human experiences, it does not depict real people or actual events. Any perceived parallels are coincidental and should not be interpreted as deliberate representations.
Out here, on a quiet stretch of land where the wind still carries the memory of fire, loss, and forgiveness, this story does not end with ashes. It begins with what remains after everything else is taken away. What Marin and Elias built was never just a house, nor a ranch, nor even a life together in the traditional sense. It was something far rarer on the frontier, a bond forged not from convenience or necessity, but from mutual respect, hard-earned trust, and the courage to see one another clearly, beyond weakness, beyond past mistakes, beyond the scars the world leaves behind. The true meaning of this story lies in the quiet power of dignity. Marin, though blind, never allowed herself to be defined by limitation. She demanded to be treated as an equal, not out of pride, but out of a deep understanding that a person's worth is not measured by what they lack, but by what they choose to stand for. Elias, a man burdened by guilt so heavy it stole his voice, believed silence was his punishment. Yet through Marin, he learned that silence is not redemption, action is. Facing the truth, speaking it, and choosing to rebuild rather than hide, that is where real strength begins. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is this: family is not something you are born into, it is something you build. On a land marked by betrayal and suffering, a blind woman, a broken man, and a lost child became something stronger than blood. They chose each other. They protected each other. They gave one another a place where dignity was not negotiated, where love did not need to be spoken loudly to be understood, and where even the most damaged souls could begin again. In a world that often values wealth, power, and appearance, this story reminds us that true riches are far simpler and far harder to earn. They are found in honesty, in loyalty, in the quiet moments where someone chooses to stand beside you when they have every reason to walk away. Gold can be buried, homes can burn, and the past can haunt you, but integrity, compassion, and the courage to change, those are things no fire can destroy. So when you walk away from this story, remember this: you are not defined by what has been done to you, nor by the mistakes you have made. You are defined by what you choose to do next, by the people you choose to stand with, by the truth you are brave enough to face. And sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is not to speak louder or see further, but to understand deeper and love without condition.